second regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Let us all observe a minute of silent prayer. Amen. Secretary, please call the roll.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligada, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 20 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Yes. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to dispense with the reading of the journal of the 17th session, Tuesday, September 5.
Any objection? The motion is to dispense with the reading of yesterday's journal. The chair hears none. Motion is approved.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move to consider the journal of 17th session, Tuesday, September 5, 2017.
Any objection to the motion? Hearing none. Motion is approved.
Mr. President, now that we are considering the journal, may be allowed to manifest a motion from your chair of the Committee on Rules. Yesterday, Senator Richard Gordon made a request from his own words, extract the word out to expunge the words Philippine Red Cross as part of the personal and collective privilege speech delivered by Senator Antonio Trillanes IV. That, from my understanding, can drag or hurt the name of the Constitution, or the institution, I should say. That's what he said. Now, to give a little background there, Mr. President, Senator Trillanes delivered a privileged speech pertaining to the ethics case filed against him. During his speech, he made mention of several statements that intend to defend himself from the allegations that he has uttered unparliamentary words in some of his statements made during the hearing of the Blue Ribbon Committee last 31st August 2017 that became the subject matter of the ethics complaint filed against him. Now, the portion of his privileged speech, he said that I'd be filing my own ethics case against Senator Gordon for his as a senator and chairman of the Blue Ribbon Committee. I will also ex-corrupt the Philippine Red. The statement, Mr. President, caught the attention of Senator Gordon that enticed him to make a request to the body to strike the records, strike in the records such reference. He said that Senator Trillanes can file a case against him or accuse him of corruption, but should not drag the name of the Philippine Red Cross into the issue. Consequently, Mr. President, this representation made the motion to refer the request made by Senator Gordon to the Committee on Rules to study the matter. So, Mr. President, your Committee on Rules, as chair, believes that matters pertaining to personal and collective privilege is indeed sacred. That should not, as much as possible, be touched to the extent that it may alter the intention of the message as contained in the personal and collective privilege being delivered by a senator. In fact, Article 6, Legislative Department, Section 11 of the Constitution, particularly on the second sentence, it states that, quote, no member shall be questioned nor be held liable in any other place for any speech or debate in the Congress or in any committee thereof, end of quote. This type of immunity clearly shows how the Constitution treated as sacred the speeches delivered by the members of Congress in this august chamber. However, after having gone over the transcript of records and careful study of the matter, the Committee on Rule firmly believes that, first, the request of Senator Gordon to remove the name of the Philippine Red Cross in the privileged speech will not in any way modify the intention of the message of Senator Trillanes, the one that he wanted to get through in the halls of the chamber. So, removing name of the Philippine Red Cross from the sentence will not affect Senator Trillanes' future intention to file his own version of ethics complaint for Senator Gordon's alleged corrupt acts, among others, and that it will stand on its own. Second, Mr. President, while the Committee on Rules believes in the sanctity of the privileged speech being delivered by a senator in the halls of the Senate, we should keep guard against any unparliamentary acts or disorderly behavior that may contain in rules. So it is the submission on rules that we will not give statements of Senator acts well stated, including evidences. Mr. President, move to records of the 17th session, September 17th, by Senator in the privilege. Following, I will also expose his corrupt acts as chairman of the Philippine Red Cross. So, as a result of this deletion, if my motion is approved, the new paragraph in the speech of Senator Trillanes that has become the subject of the request for deletion by Senator Gordon shall now read as follows. Quote, I'd be filing my own ethics case against Senator Gordon for his unparliamentary and unethical acts as Senator and Chairman of the Blue Ribbon Committee. Period. Now, moreover, Mr. President, considering that Senator Gordon gave his consent yesterday during his manifestation that he is willing to be accused by corruption by Senator Trillanes, the committee believes that the deletion will serve the purpose of the message of Senator Trillanes, even without mention of the proposed deleted sentence. So at any rate, he can use such allegations in his ethics complaints against Senator Gordon if he intends to pursue it. So with that, Mr. President, I so move that we delete that particular reference to the Philippine Red Cross.
Senator Drilon?
Mr. President, may we request that we have another meeting of the Rules Committee to discuss this matter. We respect the views of the chair of the Committee on Rules, but maybe a collegial discussion we may be able to arrive at some solution to this problem. So we request that the motion be tabled in the meantime while we are given an opportunity as members of the Committee on Rules to discuss this point.
We have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended. The table of Rule 89. Motion to table.
Sinabi ko sa kanya, tinitingnan pa rin natin.
Pakitanong kung ano na. Bakit? Okay. Session is resumed.
Thank you. Mr. President, we will not object to the manifestation of the minority leader, and therefore I move to table my motion, Mr. President.
We're just suspending Majority Leader consideration of the
Yes.
motion. Okay, so that's the effect. So any objection to the motion? There being none, motion is approved.
We will move to approve the journal at a later time, Mr. President. Thank you. I move now with before we proceed with the reference of business, may I recognize guests of the Senate, guests of Senator Subiri, Mayor Pantao Midtimbang Jr. from Gindulungan Municipality, Province of Maguindanao. We also like to acknowledge the students of the Lourdes School, Quezon City, headed by their teachers, Ms. Charity Reyes, Ms. Lady May Alnaez, Ms. Myla Belalo. Guest of Senator Pacquiao, Jacinto Jesse Frani, former City Council of Dasmariñas City, Mayor Renaldo Concepcion of Tanjay Negros Oriental. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Councilor Alan Reyes and company of the District 3 of Quezon City, Mayor Jerry Natanawan of Talisay, Batangas, Mr. President, and also, Mr. President, this is to manifest and express our congratulations and support to our Senate basketball team, known as the Senate Advocates, for entering the championship final series of the first Makabansa Basketball League. The Senate Advocates, led by Senator Sani Angara and Joel Villanueva, with Senator Ralph Recto as its team manager, will battle with the Philippine Star on September 10 and 16, respectively. The two finalists bested the other 15 participating teams, both from the government and private sectors. So with the entry of the Senate Advocates, Mr. President, in the championship games, the team's beneficiary, the PWDs of the Tahanang Walang Hagdanan Incorporated, is already assured of the cash prizes. So let us support and wish the best to our Senate Advocates, and may you bring home the first MBL trophy to the Senate, Mr. President.
Senator Drilon.
We second the of the majority leader because we may not have another opportunity after the game is played.
So, welcome to our guests and congratulations to the Senate basketball team. And for the information of everybody, two senators actually play in the games as center and power forward.
Senator Joel Villanueva, Joel Villanueva plays guard,
Okay, sorry.
and Senator
Senator
Sani
Sani
Angara
Angara.
plays guard and boxer. Thank you, Mr. President.
But
may we
congratulations
recognize
to all.
the minority leader for a manifestation.
Senator Drilon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. At yesterday's session, Senator Trillanes resigned as a member of the Ethics Committee representing the minority, and the same was accepted. In view of that, Mr. President, may we nominate Senator Bam Aquino to replace Senator Trillanes in the Committee on Ethics representing the minority group.
Is there any objection? There being none, Senator Aquino is now a member of the Ethics Committee to represent the minority.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Reference of business.
Message of the President of the Philippines. Letter of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte is dated 23 August 2017, submitting for the Senate's consideration and concurrence the Protocol of 1988 relating to the International Convention on Load Lines 1966, Load Line Protocol 88, which was adopted on 11 November 1988 in London.
Referred to the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Resolutions. 491, resolution amending the rules of procedure governing inquiries in aid of legislation for the provision of protective custody of legislative witnesses. Senator Soto III.
To the Committee on Rules.
492, resolution congratulating and commending the 2017 Metrobank Foundation Outstanding Filipinos to be honored on September 7, 2017 at the Metrobank Plaza in Makati City, Philippines. Senator Saveri.
To the Committee on Rules.
493, resolution commending and congratulating the Filipino athletes, coaches, and trainers who garnered medals in the 29th Southeast Asian Games held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committee on Rules.
494, resolution congratulating and commending the members of the Philippine contingent to the 29th Southeast Asian Games held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia on 19 to 30 August 2017 for honoring the country with a total of 24 gold, 33 silver, and 64 bronze medals in the 11-nation sports meet. Senator Soberi.
To the Committee on Rules.
Communications. Letters from the Office of the President of the Philippines transmitting to the Senate two original copies of the following Republic Acts which were signed by President Rodrigo Roa Duterte. Republic Act number 10933 entitled Dividing Barangay North Bay Boulevard South in Navotas into Barangay NBBS proper, Barangay NBBS Kaunlaran, and Barangay NBBS Dagat-Dagatan. Republic Act 10934 dividing Barangay Tangos in Navotas into Barangays Tangos North and Tangos South. Republic Act 10935 dividing Barangay Tansa in Navotas into Barangay Tansa 1 and Barangay Tansa 2. Republic Act 10936 creating a Barangay Kumawas in Bislig, Surigao del Sur. Republic Act 10937 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Bislig, Surigao del Sur. Republic Act 10938 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Lopez, Quezon. Republic Act 10939 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Antimonan, Quezon. Republic Act 10940 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Gumaca, Quezon. Republic Act 10941 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Barobo, Surigao del Sur. Republic Act 10942 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Tagkawayan, Quezon. Republic Act number 10943 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Quezon, Quezon. Republic Act 10944 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Hinatuan, Surigao del Sur. Republic Act number 10945 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Perez, Quezon. Republic Act 10946 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Calawag, Quezon. Republic Act number 10947 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Plaridel, Quezon. Republic Act 10948 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Ginayangan, Quezon. Republic Act 10949 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Alabat, Quezon. And Republic Act 10950 establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Ligao, Albay.
To the Archives.
Letter from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15, Paragraph A of Republic Act number 7653, the New Central Bank Act. Circular numbers 969, 970, 971, and 972 dated 22 August 2017. Letters, circular letter numbers CL-2017-049 dated 22 August 2017.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1284 under Committee Report 24.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
This is the Traffic and Congestion Crisis Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of interpellations. So may we recognize the sponsor of the measure, Chairman of the Committee on Public Services, Senator Mary Grace Poe, and to interpellate Senator Richard Gordon, Mr. President. We have 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended. Sige lang, pwesto ka muna.
Meron din ako.
Pakisenyasan siya Majority Leader. Kung pwede. Okay.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Senator Grace Poe and Senator Richard Gordon.
Senator Poe, as sponsor, is recognized. Senator Gordon, for interpellation, is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the Senate, I'd like to ask the gentle lady if she's willing to take a few questions.
It will be my pleasure from the gentleman from Olongapo, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I am at the outset in favor of a solution to the traffic mess. But I do have a problem, excuse me. I do have a problem with respect to the matter of whether the grant of emergency powers to solve traffic congestion crisis is allowed by the 1987 Constitution. The constitutional provision on the grant of emergency powers speaks about Section 23. Specifically, the Congress, by vote of 2/3 of both houses, a joint session assembled, voting separately, shall have the sole power to declare the existence of a state of war. 2. In times of war or other national emergency, the Congress may by law authorize the President for a limited period and subject to such restrictions as it may prescribe to exercise powers necessary and proper to carry out a declared national policy. Unless sooner withdrawn by resolution of the Congress, such power shall cease upon the next adjournment thereof. There's a gentle lady positing the idea that we are in a state of war and therefore we're having a national emergency that requires a law that requires a national emergency to handle traffic.
Well, Mr. President, certainly it feels like it's war every time we have to go to work every day and come home from work. But I understand the concern of the good senator. But however, in Section 23, Article 6 of the Constitution, it authorizes Congress to delegate such powers to the President in time of war or other national emergencies. Our view, Mr. President, is that losing 3 billion pesos a day at a minimum due to traffic is alarming enough to constitute a national emergency. There are many battles that we fight every day in many different fronts, and I think that with the rise of economic progress in our country, we are now faced with this problem, which is traffic, because there are more businesses, there are more people, our population is huge. So it is now a crisis of national significance because of losses due to traffic. And I think that it's been proven also that with lesser traffic, our GDP will actually grow. So I feel that in support of this administration's agenda to create more jobs, to make it more conducive for investment, we need to be able to provide them with the infrastructure needed and all of these other regulations that will ease traffic.
I am aware of the intention of alleviating traffic, Mr. President, but obviously the provision of the Constitution applies to in times of war or other national emergency. And this is a 1973 Constitution adaptation, Mr. President. It was taken from the 1973 Constitutional Convention, of which I was part of. In the case of Eloy Rodriguez et al. Versus Vicente Hela, etc. et al. And I quote, moreover, Section 26 of Article 6 of the Constitution, in virtue of which Act Number 671 was passed, authorizes the delegation of powers by the Congress in times of war or other national emergency. Supreme Court said the emergency expressly spoken of in the title and in Section 1 of the Act is one in time of war, as distinguished from other national emergency that may arise as an after effect of war or from natural causes such as widespread earthquakes, typhoons, floods, and the like. Certainly the typhoons that hit some provinces and cities in 1952 not only did not result from the last World War, but were and could not have been contemplated by the legislators. At any rate, the Congress is available for necessary special sessions, and it cannot let the people down without somehow being answerable therefore. So, Mr. President, it is clear that the national emergency that's being spoken about does not apply in this particular case because it speaks of typhoons, natural calamities. Although there is a problem, we have to find language to see to it that we can allow this proposal to happen without having to cross bats with the constitutional explanation of the law.
Mr. President, I feel that, of course, the Constitution is a living document, and that's why we're all here. Number one, sometimes we need to amend it, sometimes we interpret it. Of course, the court does that the interpretation of this law. But on the other hand, I think that traffic is a man-made calamity. It's still a calamity that requires the grant of emergency powers to solve so that it will be faster, less obstacles. And I also think that for as long as the limitations provided by law, for example, the delegation must be for a limited period. The delegation must be subject to such restrictions as Congress may prescribe, or the emergency powers must be exercised to carry out a national policy declared by Congress. I feel that we have enough safety measures so that even if it is not in the strict sense of the word as may be interpreted in the past, I feel that it's still subject to debate. But we have all of these measures to guarantee that it will not also be abused.
When we speak here in debate, it doesn't mean that we are disagreeing with one another, Mr. President. It only means that we're trying to lay the predicate for the Supreme Court to find out what the intention of Congress is. In that sense, when the judiciary interprets a law and creates constitutional precedent, Mr. President, it is acting as part of its legislative powers, which are inherent when it interprets decisions. In fact, it expands the law as that has not been clarified so well. However, Mr. President, let me go read further and see whether we can see our way clear into this matter. Continuing on, shelter may not be sought in the proposition that the President should be allowed to exercise emergency powers for the sake of speed and expediency in the interest and for the welfare of the people. Because we have the Constitution designed to establish a government under a regime of justice, liberty, and democracy. In line with such primordial objective, our government is democratic in form and based on the system of separation of powers. Unless and until changed or amended to abide by the letter and Constitution, be prepared for consequences resulting from in disagreement between a usual of the legislature or legislative and executive departments. Much as it is imperative in some cases to have prompt official action, deadlocks in and slowness of democratic processes must be preferred to concentration of powers in any one man or group of men for obvious reasons. The framers of the Constitution, however, had the vision of and were careful in allowing delegation of legislative powers to the President for a limited period in times of war or other national emergency. They had thus entrusted to the good judgment of the Congress the duty of coping with any national emergency by a more efficient procedure. But it alone must decide, because emergency in itself cannot and should not create power. That is the thrust of the Supreme Court decision. A man-made emergency such as this by itself cannot create power, and it is beyond the coverage, therefore, of this provision, Mr. President.
Well taken, Mr. President. I respect the opinion of the good senator, and I feel that in this particular emergency powers bill, it's very specific what the intention is. As I mentioned, I respect that the interpretation of emergency may not necessarily be his view of what an emergency it is, but the reality is, I maintain, and many of us do, that the crisis we are now facing is really of national proportions, an emergency. Number one, the good senator mentioned that expediency is important, and the President, whom the people voted and has given the mandate to solve the one of the campaign promises also the President is to be able to solve traffic. But unfortunately, with the very bureaucratic system that we have and all of the labyrinth of regulations that are some very outdated, we need something that will expedite the processes in order to allow the projects of the government to move forward quickly and hopefully within the term of this administration?
Well, the thrust of the Constitution, Mr. President, is not to create power unless the basis for the power is there, the national emergency. And the Constitution is clear. It doesn't accept just any emergency. I am trying to find a way clear into trying to get this law passed. And one of the things that I would like to suggest, instead of calling it an emergency power, and we're crafting legislation to this effect, is to, one, if you want lesser traffic, it's about time, and it's been talked about for a long time, that we decongest Manila. If there is such a law, then you don't need the emergency. If we decongest Manila by providing, example, for people who wants to go to, then you don't need this emergency power. We have proposed a bill, and we intend to call it in later on so that we could go around this problem of the emergency. Because if we could decongest it, then you could urge factories to rebuild their pump prime the economy, also give incentives to housing as we do that. And at the same time, you can even rebuild Manila, which is no longer Metro Manila because it has gone beyond metropolitan status. It has become Mega Manila because of the many millions that are there. So one thing that I am trying to craft right now, Mr. President, and I don't want to delay this, is perhaps if we are allowed to come up with that proposal as part of this proposal, it can be you can only have Manila industry and allow housing to thrive, and at the same time all the infrastructure that needs to be built will be part of that. And when you do that, you also get a double buck in the sense that you are also able to rebuild Mega Manila. And which leads me now to my second point. I will go back to the first point later on. Congress may delegate its powers, but it cannot afford to have those powers delegated without making sure that it is not bound by margins or by boundaries that will keep the banks from overflowing into other things. That is why the delegation of power that I'm speaking of here, the law must be sufficient in itself. It must set forth a policy to be executed, carried out, or implemented by the delegate. This is under Pelaez versus Auditor General. At the same time, we must fix standards for the executive to follow sufficiently determinate or determinable to which the delegate must conform in the performance of his functions. Which means, Mr. President, if we are able to craft this bill in that fashion, we can indeed delegate without having to use the word emergency, which the Supreme Court, a co-equal branch of government, to thwart the purpose of Congress. I'm just trying to make sure that the law is passed without any hassles, Mr. President.
Well, thank you. That's much appreciated, Mr. President. And I agree wholeheartedly with the sentiment of the good senator that indeed development should be outward of Metro Manila. And in fact, part of what we have here are the NEDA-approved studies of building a train system from Clark all the way here, and then supporting housing projects from those that may be relocated from, or informal settlers here that must be relocated, but there will be enough funding for the relocation so that they won't be thrown in an area that has no economic support whatsoever. I just feel that with the power of the President being given by this bill, we will be able to enact this quickly as opposed to having to go through the normal process that unfortunately has slowed us down so many times also in the past.
No, Mr. President, I'm glad that the gentle lady agrees because with all the infrastructure in that bill of mine, and you can see it on the board, and I'm trying to posit my bill to try and thwart, we can all co-author this. The infrastructure already built, the NLEX, the SETEX, the TIPLEX, as well as the Olongapogapan Highway. It will be attractive because there will be 3 airports and 3 seaports within the general area, which will mean that ships can come into Subic or Mariveles or to Manila and can land in airports in Subic and Clark and Manila, and which therefore would be a very good incentive. But of course, the real incentive that really try to even bring in investments is that every can have 100 to 200 that can be designed for factories, for business centers, plus housing.
Right.
And when you provide those incentives and you provide additional incentives for people who provide housing and credit, then you are, as I said, pump priming the economy and at the same time reducing traffic dramatically here. And that can happen very, very fast. This has been done in India, this has been done in Mumbai, if I'm not mistaken, and in Calcutta. And I don't have to go far. Take a look at Calabarzon. Calabarzon is an idea of what I'm talking about. You have all the factories in Laguna and all the residences behind the factories in Laguna. So, hindi na nagta-traffic. Pero nakakatakot po yung sinasabi ng Department of Transportation. Nagagawa sila ng tren, patungo na naman sa Manila. E di mag-overload na naman po ang Manila. Imbis na kumalat yung biyahe, dapat ikalat natin yung negosyo patungo sa Central Luzon, Northern Luzon, hanggang dito sa Southern Luzon, because you have another port in Batangas that can be serviced also by the Port of Manila, the Port of Batangas, plus the Airport of Manila. So that way, we can see our way clear in providing a vision. You will recall, Mr. Chairman, that in one of our caucuses, I asked the Reda, ano ba talaga ang purpose ninyo? Ano ba ang vision ninyo? Kung wala tayong vision, gagawa-gawa tayo ng parte-parte, pero hindi natin makita kung paano mapapalakas ang hanap buhay at mapaigi ang traffic. So, ang sinasabi ko po rito, kung maaari, mapag-aralan po natin maigi ito, and I'm willing to sit down with the gentle lady and craft right away the provision, because we have crafted that, call siguro 1 or 2 hearings, and get the incentives, and even get this certified by the President. I'm sure he'll be happy, because pag naglipat yan, magpapagawa ng pabrika, trabaho yan. Tatakbo ang simento, tatakbo ang commercial, dadami ang barko magdadala ng produkto para magamit sa mga gagawing produkto at factory. At ganoon na rin sa Maynila, pag bago tayo, kung pataas na ang gagawin natin design ng building, maluluwagan na natin ang building, ang area, maililipat nyo, kung titingnan nyo, I don't know if my people have the picture of Metro Manila with the port so, diba? With the port so congested na may mga informal settlers, that really shows how bereft of vision our country is and how difficult it is for our people to live so near to the port and yet living like rats. And that is what I'm trying to say. This is not, I'm not trying to come out with an ulterior motive. This is a vision that I've had since 1980. And I think if the President really wants to have this program, with the railroad being planned, those railroads can go to the seaports, and on either side of the railroad, you can have it. Once upon a time, you've heard me said here, once too often, there was a railroad from Manila all the way to La Union.
Right.
Eh ngayon, ang nakita lang, bakas na lang, nawala na yung mga bakal.
Ayun na nga.
At yun ang pagkakamali natin, hindi natin in-expand yung mga pabrika on either side para sa ganon lumakas. But if you look at Japan,
57 billion.
ano tayo? Ano ba yan?
Yes, Mr. President.
Please bring it over here. Excuse me, I'll just say one. 1 minute, Mr. President. Can you bring the goddamn, yung ating yung ating TV, na yung ating mga poster, pinapakita ko yung mga plan, tsaka yung mga poster ng kwan. Sinabi ko na yan eh. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Are we ready? Ano na siya? table ko yung... Ibaba na yun para mapit.
Ah, sige. Yeah.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1284 committee report.
Any objection? None. Is granted.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 909 under Committee Report 77.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
This is the measure on increasing the penalties for illegal gambling. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're in the period of interpellation and would like to recognize the sponsor, Chair of the Committee on Games and Amusement, Senator Papilo Lacson.
The chairman, Senator Lacson, is recognized.
We have not any interpellator. President, I of interpellation.
Objection? Hearing none, for interpellation.
Open the of amendments
Is there any
to the bill.
committee?
Committee.
We period committee amendments.
To introduce committee amendments, may we ask that the chair of the committee be recognized, Senator Lacson.
Senator Lacson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I only have one committee amendment on page 4, line 6, under section 3 of the bill. Insert Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Office after comma and before the word other. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the amendment is approved.
Kaya na, walang individual.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of committee.
Objection, hearing none, approved.
Move to open individual amendment.
Objection, approved.
Meron. Ito, hindi. President, I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Any objection, hearing none, approved.
Move to approve on second reading, Senate Bill 909 under Committee Report 77.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senate Bill number 909 is approved on second reading.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1461 under Committee Report.
Okay. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
This is the proposed measure on the Electric Cooperatives Emergency and Resiliency Fund Act of 2017. The parliamentary status of the measure is we are still in the period of interpellation. So may I move to recognize the sponsor of the measure, Chairman of the Committee on Energy, Senator Win Gatchalian.
Senator Gatchalian is recognized.
And to interpellate, the Minority Leader, Senator Frank Relon.
Senator Dillon is not in the hall yet.
Move to suspend the session for a few minutes.
Session
Mr. President.
suspended. Bakit? Bakit? Pag ready na. Okay na sa... Hindi pa. Hintayin natin. Session is resumed. Senator Drilon is recognized for interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentleman sponsor yield to a few questions for clarification, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. I'll be more than happy to receive some questions, Mr. President.
Mr. President, correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that this is an appropriations bill. We appropriate 750 million pesos from the Calamity Fund, which will be administered by the National Electrification Administration for the benefit of the electric cooperatives in case of force majeure, and distribute the same to the cooperatives. Is that a correct impression, sir?
Yes, Mr. President. It's a fund that will be solely used to rehabilitate electric cooperatives in case of force majeure and fortuitous event, Mr. President.
In fact,
And also, this, a part of the fund, which is about 20% of the fund, will also be used to for disaster preparedness, Mr. President.
now, suppose the General Appropriations Act will not carry this kind of an appropriation. What happens to the law that were passed?
Mr. President, the most important component of this law is really the fund that will enable the electric co-ops to tap into it as quickly as possible so they can restore power in areas where the calamity happened, Mr. President.
We know, Mr. President, but we also know that funds are appropriated in the General Appropriations Act. That's why my first question
Yes,
was,
Mr. President.
this is an appropriations bill. So that if the General Appropriations Act does not carry the appropriation for the Electric Cooperative Emergency and Resiliency Fund, what will happen?
Then the bill will not be effective as what is supposed to implement, Mr. President.
Now,
But, Mr. President, let me also point out right now, there's also a, let me just pull up slide number 2, Mr. President, just to explain to the distinguished minority floor leader. Right now, as we speak, there are 3 mechanisms to help electric cooperatives. But all of these are quite, have their own complexities. Number 1, there's a calamity loan existing in the NEA, and these loans are extended to electric cooperatives in times of need and in times of calamity. However, this is a loan, and whenever the loan is being extended to cooperatives, it's passed on to the consumers. So those people who are in dire need of support, instead of getting support, they are paying for the loan for rehabilitation. The other mechanism is the NDREAM Fund. However, the NDREAM Fund, it takes 2 years for that fund to be dispensed to the electric cooperatives who are in need of restoration. And the other one, which is existing right now, is the Quick Response Fund. However, again, it takes about a month for the Quick Response Fund to be given to the electric co-ops. So the design of this fund is actually immediate support to the electric co-ops. We envision that it will only take 2 to 3 days for the funds to be released to the electric co-ops so they can restore power as soon as possible.
okay, maybe there is merit in the assertion of, or in the desire of the good sponsor to have a quick release of funds to the electric cooperatives. But is that purpose not at, or presently, Mr. President, In cases of calamities, the natural disasters, the electric cooperatives would access the calamity funds managed by the national NDRRMC. Is that correct?
Correct, Mr. President. The mechanism to access the NDREAM fund is quite cumbersome. And let me just pull out slide number 15.
No, yeah, well, that the process is cumbersome.
Cumbersome. It takes, actually what happens is they extend the loan first. NEA extends the loan first. So for the electric co-ops to restore power and to restore their infrastructure, they have to borrow first. But this loan is in turn passed on to the consumers. So those who are devastated by calamity, they have to pay that loan that the electric co-ops borrow to restore power. And then that loan itself can be passed to the NDREAM fund to become a subsidy. However, it takes about 2 years before it becomes a subsidy. So what happens is that for 2 years, the member consumers who are devastated, they are the ones who are paying the loan and the interest.
So it is in effect a subsidy fund.
If the NDREAM fund approves the subsidy, because it's not all the time that the NDREAM approves the subsidy. Some of them are not converted, so it stays as a loan for a very long time. I think 20 years.
So why
10 to 15 years, Mr. President.
why don't we impose rules on and change the process so that the availment can be at a faster pace rather than giving to another agency the administration of what basically is a calamity fund.
Right. Mr. President, the NDREAM fund, let me just pull out slide number 2 once again. The NDREAM fund is being administered by the NDREAM Council. And the NDREAM Council is also managing other components such as infrastructure, such as the LGU requirement, and such as other requirement. The electric co-ops is only one facet and one aspect that the NDREAM Council manages. So that's why it takes about 2 years for them to convert the loan into a subsidy. This is because they're also managing many other components of disaster response.
May I know the official position of the NDREAM Council or the Office of the Civil Defense on carving out 750 million pesos from the Calamity Fund, which they administer, and bring it to the National Electrification Administration?
Yes, Mr. President, we had 2 hearings, and they were present also in those hearings and also in the technical working group, and they support this measure because this will not take out. This would only remove the electric co-ops component in their disaster response responsibility, Mr. President.
How much is the total calamity fund in the budget?
For the calamity fund, it's about 15 billion, Mr. President. But this is all encompassing of the entire nation's calamity fund.
And out of that 15 billion, we are carving out 750 million, just for
Yes,
each
Mr. President.
understanding.
Yes, Mr. President. Right now, if you look at the third line, there's already an allocated 200 million in the budget. Actually, 100 million, and it was replenished again after 6 months, I think, to 200 million. That component is actually for the support of rehabilitations of electric cooperatives. What we are proposing is to carve out the component of electric cooperatives from that NDREAM fund.
Yes, that's what I gather from the bill.
Yes.
That you're going to carve out 750 million from the NDREAM, whatever it is
NDREAM
called
fund.
now, from the calamity fund, and let the NEA administer that 750 million.
Yes, the philosophy here, Mr. President, is speed. So, because NEA is the one who has general supervision over the electric co-ops, it is envisioned that NEA will now facilitate the support to the electric co-ops as quick as possible. Anything between 2 to 3 days, Mr. President.
And after this fund is exhausted, what happens? If the fund is exhausted in the middle of the year,
Right.
for calamities that happened, during that year.
Yes. Mr. President, they can still access the traditional NDREAM fund, although it will not be as, the process will not be as fast and expedited as we envisioned in this bill, Mr. President.
Well,
Mr. President, let me
yes.
just pull out slide number 7, Mr. President. And we calculated the average subsidy that's being given to the electric co-ops for the last 10 years. And we calculated it, it's about 675 million pesos, Mr. President, on the average per year. So we just increased it by 80 million, just to take into account inflation and other expenses, Mr. President.
And is it now obligatory for the national government to allocate 750 million yearly
That is the
to the
intent.
NEA?
That is the intention, President, considering that national government is already giving 675 million in form of subsidy, Mr. President.
I have no more questions, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you, Minority Floor Leader. Wala na.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation on Senate Bill 1461 under Committee Report 98.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Meron kayong committee amendments? Hindi na kayo.
Tuloy-tuloy na.
Meron ba? Ngayon na. Hindi pa ngayon.
I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1461 to allow our members to study proposed amendments, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. Sa yung bamboo sana.
Yung Fiscal and Monetary Report Act. Tapos na? Fiscal Monetary Report Act. Period of amendment. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1483 under Committee Report 117.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
This is the Fiscal and Monetary Report Act of 2017. The parliamentary status of the measure is we have already terminated the period of interpellations. We are going into the period of amendments, so I move to open the period of amendments, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, we open the period for amendments.
May you now recognize the sponsor, Chair of the Committee on Economic Affairs, Senator Win Gatchalian.
Senator Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Do we have committee amendments?
This is individual amendments, Mr. President.
Yes, I specifically moved to open the period of amendments because I thought this was a substitute bill, and therefore we will just go into the individual amendments instead.
So we are now, just to clarify, we are now in the period for individual amendments.
Yes,
Is that
Mr.
correct? Majority
Yes,
Leader?
President.
Yes, Mr. President.
So, okay, go ahead, please.
Mr. President, on page 1, line 6, put a space between the word constitution and the word "and." I so move, Mr. President.
What happens to the comma?
Sorry, constitution, comma. Sorry, Mr. President. Let me just repeat,
okay.
put a space between the word constitution, comma, and the word "and." I so
Okay.
move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 1, lines 12 to 15, delete the phrase "session of Congress to be attended by the Committees on Appropriations, Ways and Means, Economic Affairs, and Banks and Financial Intermediaries of the House of Representatives and the Committees on Finance, Ways and Means, Economic Affairs, and Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies of the Senate," and replace it with the phrase "Congressional Oversight Committee on Fiscal and Monetary Policies to be composed of the following, colon, the chairperson of the Committee on Economic Affairs as chair, comma, and the chairpersons of the Committees on Finance, comma, Ways and Means, comma, and Banks, comma, Financial Institutions and Currencies as members from the Senate, semicolon, the chairperson of the Committee on Economic Affairs as co-chair, comma, and the chairpersons of the Committees on Appropriations, comma, Ways and Means, comma, and Banks and Financial Intermediaries as members of the House of Representatives, semicolon, and one, open parenthesis, one, number 1, close parenthesis, member each from the Senate and the House of Representatives representing the minority, comma. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the amendment is approved.
On page 2, lines 29 to 34, insert a new item, I, and add the phrase "national budget," semicolon, on line 29. And renumber the existing enumeration from lines 29 to 34 as the subsequent subsections. Enumeration section as follows: budget, semicolon, II, status of expenditure program, III, status of disbursement, semicolon, IV, period, statement of appropriations, comma, allotments, comma, obligation and balances, semicolon, and letter V, period, other information that may be requested by the committees specified in section 3, semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
And lastly, in the title, Mr. President, delete the phrase "session of Congress" and replace it with the phrase "Congressional Oversight Committee." The title will now read as follows: An act mandating the Secretaries of the Department of Finance, comma, National Economic and Development Authority, comma, and the Department of Budget and Management, comma, and the Governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, comma, to appear biannually before a joint Congressional Oversight Committee to report on the status and directions of the fiscal and monetary policies of the state. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
That's all, Mr. President.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to give time to the other members to go over the proposed amendments and perhaps proposed their own individual amendments. I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1483 under Committee Report 117.
Suspend consideration. So, we're only suspending consideration, Majority Leader. But before I act on that, I call the sponsor to the word committees, which still appear on in the bill. Committees. So because we're changing it into a JCOC, so just take a look. Anyway, we're just suspending. Okay. So any objection to the suspension of the consideration of this measure? There being none, motion is approved. Tama na, Queenie, no? Dapat committee na lang, the JCOC na lang. Majority Leader?
Yes, we move to suspend consideration, Mr. President.
It has been acted upon.
Okay. The minority leader is just going over the next item on the agenda. So in the meantime, I move to suspend for a minute, Mr. President.
Session is suspended. Ano bang next?
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
With the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1478 under Committee Report 116.
1478, okay. Is there any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, this is the proposed measure on the Philippine Bamboo Industry Development Act of 2017. The parliamentary status of the measure is we're in the period of interpellation. So I therefore move to recognize the sponsor of the measure, Chair of the Committee on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship, Senator Mig Subiri, and to interpellate the minority leader, Senator Franklin Drilon.
The sponsor, Senator Subiri and Senator Drilon, are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will you gentlemen yield to some questions in relation to this bill which seeks to institutionalize a Philippine bamboo industry development program?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Mr. President.
May we ask the sponsor to spread into the record what are the main objectives of this measure?
Well, first of all, Mr. President, reading parts of the Declaration of Policy, we'd like to provide a self-reliant, independent economy to its people, our nation, and to support indigenous scientific technological capabilities and skills. And we believe, Your Honor, Mr. President, that the bamboo industry can help in poverty reduction, inclusive growth, environmental conservation and protection, agricultural productivity enhancement, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. We consider this, if certain groups consider the coconut is the tree of life, we believe that bamboo is the grass of life. Ibang inisip ni Senator Gatchalian na grass. It is a grass because bamboo is a grass. And it is, has many uses, Mr. President, Your Honor. And the beauty of this is it is commercially viable. It helps in anti-erosion measures. It also grows in our climate very well. And that's the reason why we're pursuing this bamboo industry development program, because we feel that bamboo can be the answer to fight poverty incidences in the countryside, Your Honor.
Yes, I fully agree and concur with the gentleman that indeed bamboo is something, the development of the bamboo industry can certainly help in our social, economic life in our country. But who is presently performing the functions enumerated by the good gentleman?
It's under the DTI. The promotion of the bamboo development program is under the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry. But there's no specific office at the moment. It's sort of like actually being conceptual by head of the regional offices. So there's no one, as a matter of fact, even when we do the budget hearings for DNR and we do the budget hearing for the DA, whenever I ask them about bamboo development, Your Honor, Mr. President, they do not have an office or an agency within their departments actually handling this, although they praise it to high heavens, but unfortunately, it's not being prioritized by these government agencies. But as of the moment, and that's the reason why we have this bill in my committee, it's really the Department of Trade and Industry that pushes for this under this, the present secretariat. Well, let me ask. Is the right now? This is the present. I have here an executive order by then President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo creating the Philippine Bamboo Industry Development Council. And it's composed by the following. It's headed by the Secretary of Trade and Industry as chair, Secretary of Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Secretary of the Department of Education, Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology, and the Department of Labor and Employment, the chair of the Executive Committee, League of Municipalities of the Philippines, 2 representatives from NGO organizations, and 1 representative from Private Industry Act. Hence, the reason why it's probably not moving. Because there's so many.
You know, when you read management books, Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
one of the first rule that they would suggest is kill committees.
Correct,
because
sir.
they delay decisions.
I agree with you, sir.
And creating a council, you know, the gentleman just said this council was created by virtue of an executive order. There are members, I know if you enumerated about 12 agencies.
That's correct.
And precisely because of these committees, nothing is moving.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Isn't it the better policy just to lodge the responsibility in a person rather than a council?
I agree, Your Honor, with the
So
gentleman.
why are we creating a council, Mr. President?
No, this is a executive order, Your Honor.
Right.
That was granted by the President.
That's correct. But
So-
doesn't the bill also create a council, Mr. President?
Yes, well, according to my experts here, not one agency has a technical expertise on bamboo. But I've already spoken to Senator Cynthia Villar about this. I've already spoken to Senator Ralph Recto, and the committee is amenable to streamlining the organization that will help push for the Bamboo Development Act. And as I mentioned, we can, in the period of amendments, committee will make the amendments of simplifying the organization that will implement this program, Your Honor.
So the intention is to amend the body or the council so that there will only be a single director, for example, in charge of this rather than a committee?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor. It will be called the Bamboo Industry Research and Development Center
And
under the DTI, sir,
Huh?
Mr. President.
Bamboo Industry Development Center. We are, sorry, we are creating a center, a development center under the DTI.
That's correct.
That's the proposal.
That's correct, Your Honor. With the-
And will that be a bureau, or will that be, is it an attached agency? What will it be structurally, Mr. President?
It will be a center, Your Honor, Mr. President, headed by an executive director through extensive consultation with the DTI. They are actually very excited for this role that they will take to be able to promote bamboo because we're moving from the production side I'm sorry, we're moving away from the planting and more into the production and marketing side already. Because we have a lot of bamboo in the Philippines. Unfortunately, it's underutilized. And the share actually in the world market is very, very small as compared to what we have and what we can develop, Your Honor, Mr. President.
How many bureaucrats is contemplated to be hired in the center?
Probably between 20 to 30 individuals, Your Honor, Mr. President. And of course, the regional offices of the DTI will assign personnel, their existing personnel, to be able to run the offices in the regional centers.
Are there also incentives being granted
Under what?
to the industry?
Under Section 12, Your Honor, we had placed a provision of incentives to investors in nursery and plantation development and bamboo enterprises. It enumerates 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, about 10 incentives, if I'm not mistaken, but 12 incentives or a dozen incentives.
And
And it's already included, Your Honor, in the incentives in the investment priority plan for 2014 and 2016 of the Bureau of BOI, Board of Investments.
so what is the cost of granting these incentives, Mr. President, in terms of foregone revenue?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Your Honor. May
Sorry?
the good gentleman from Iloilo repeat the question?
Yes. What is the cost of granting these incentives enumerated in Section 12 in terms of foregone revenues? You know, we in the last Congress we enacted the so-called TIMTA law, which would require companies granted tax holidays, incentives, to report to Congress the cost of these incentives in the form of foregone revenues and what is the benefit to the country by the activities that are being undertaken by the beneficiaries of such incentive. So in the same vein, we want to find out from the gentleman what is the cost to the government in terms of the foregone revenues with all these incentives, knowing fully well that the government is pushing for the tax reform, which is aimed to provide for revenue through plugging the loopholes. And in our conversation with the Secretary of Finance, he is seriously pushing after the review of the tax incentives presently granted by the incentive granting agencies, in order to find out, if these are still valid incentives granted. The rationalization of fiscal incentive is a policy that this administration of President Duterte is pushing. On the other hand, here we are granting all of these incentives, and it would appear to me that there is no consistency in the policy. One, where we are granting incentives, which may be necessary, and on the other hand, there is a move to rationalize all the fiscal incentives granted by this government.
Yes, Mr. President, I understand the question of the good gentleman from Iloilo, the Republic of the Philippines. As a matter of fact, I had asked my technical team here. Unfortunately, the DTI is not here. I don't want to give a guess on the amount, and I will answer him with the data when the data arrives. We'll probably have a second round of interpolations, and maybe I could provide the data in terms of cost lost by government on this type of incentive scheme, Your Honor. And I apologize to the gentleman from Iloilo. I don't have the data right now. Although it is still our right when we pass legislation to be able to legislate incentives for particular industries. It may be government's policy, but in many times, I remember when I was Majority Leader in the 14th Congress, where we gave out incentives to industries which was frowned upon by then Secretary of Finance, Gary Teves. One of them happened to be the cooperative sector. And so it does not stop us to legislate incentives given out to industries here in the upper chamber and the lower chamber. But on the question of the good gentleman from Iloilo, I will dig deeper and we'll find out at what cost will these incentives, what cost this will be to our national economy, Your Honor.
The bill also creates a bamboo industry trust fund, which initially would be funded by the amount of 100 million coming from PAGCOR, and thereafter 200 million every year for the next 20 years will be contributed by the government in the trust fund. Is this a correct reading, Mr. President?
That's correct, Your Honor. That's a proposal that we gave, that we approved in the committee, and we're, of course, asking the support of our legislators, subject to amendments, of course.
How was the 100 million arrived at, Mr. President?
We're looking at implementing, if we look at the DTI's program on the Shared Service Facilities, SSF, which is a very successful program of the DTI. They had a budget of 1 billion to be able to provide cooperatives and farmers organizations with, for example, coffee processing machines, equipment, cacao processing equipment, and we need the same also for bamboo development, because as seen with many of our trade fairs, bamboo can be utilized as plywood, can be utilized as flooring. The flooring of my house, as a matter of fact, is engineered plywood that makes it look like engineered hardwood, but it's actually bamboo. And we can do that now with this type of technology that would give the farmers and their communities a higher value for their products. But we need funding, or government needs funding, to be able to come up with the RD, Research and Development and Science and Technology, for these products to be distributed to the different regions. So at 100 million, as a matter of fact, Your Honor, I think it will probably be only able to support a few developing areas, or areas that are developing bamboo production and strengthen it. So it's a measly sum if you think about the overall view of the Republic of the Philippines from north to south, and when we have to share these shared service facilities, these plants or these manufacturing equipment, which could cost tens of millions to actually make or buy. So that's how we came up with the number, Your Honor. Definitely, initially it may strike our colleagues as a large number, but if you look at the totality of things, when the DTI, as I mentioned earlier, when they had the shared service facility of 1 billion pesos, they were only able to service maybe 30% of the cooperatives, small and medium cooperatives, in the release of equipment needed for their production of agricultural products. So it could be amended by the body. I leave it to the pleasure of our good gentlemen and ladies of this chamber.
The concept here is 100 million as a trust fund. Is it my understanding that you can only use the yield on this trust fund and not the corpus itself when you say trust fund?
Well, it says here the program of expenditures for projects and programs and activities to be funded by the trust fund
Right.
will be itemized on a project-to-project basis.
No, sir.
Submitted, yes,
Because the bill says 100 million initially, and then 200 million per year for the next 20 years as a trust fund. Is that the correct
Yes, that's
reading?
correct.
All right. So 200 million per year for 20 years would be 4 billion.
that's correct, Your Honor.
That's correct. Now, is it the intention, since it is a trust fund, that you will not use the principal or the corpus of the trust fund and only use the interest, the yield? Is that how it will
Yes.
work?
Yes, Your Honor, on the trust fund, the yield of the trust.
And this will be the principal source of funding for the operations of the council? Just
We'll still request for appropriations, Your Honor. As a matter of fact, Section 14 will request 100 million to be sourced from the unexpended contingency fund of the Office of the President. So,
why do we need a trust fund, Mr. President, if we are all going to get operating expenses anyway from the General Appropriations Act?
the explanation of the Bamboo Industry Development Trust Fund is to establish a special account in the general fund of the National Treasury to be called the Philippine Bamboo Industry Development Trust Fund. And the purpose of the fund is for research and development, trade promotions, credit, human resource development in the bamboo industry, and for the welfare of farmers, workers, processors, and stakeholders. The trust fund shall be capitalized, managed, utilized, and accounted for in the manner provided on this act.
I just could not figure out, a trust fund, as we ordinarily understand it, a trust fund is a fund that you create and as a permanent fund, and you utilize for whatever purpose the yields that you realize out of a trust fund. But apparently the concept is you can use this, the very corpus itself of the trust fund, and theoretically you can spend everything. The trust fund at the end of the day can be zero.
Yes, Your Honor. This
So
is
why do we
what
call
is-
it a trust fund if it will be zero at the end of the day?
Yes, Your Honor. We will restudy this particular provision, Your Honor.
Yeah, because, well, okay, I'll put it on the table now, because the source of the trust fund is supposed to be PAGCOR, 100 million. But PAGCOR, in the committee headed by Senator Ping Lacson, would be limited to regulation and no longer operation. So we were just wondering where the source of the 100 million will come from if PAGCOR will simply be a regulatory body.
Your Honor, may I ask for a 1-minute suspension?
Yes, sir.
Session
Mr. President, we still have a number of questions. Maybe we can suspend.
Yes, Your Honor, but it would be
the-
probably better
Yeah.
to wait for, we are missing one. I thought that all the technical personnel are here, but apparently the members of the DTI are not here, and they would be the best to answer these questions of the good gentleman from
So,
Iloilo.
not
So
only-
maybe
not-
we can suspend.
The consideration of the
Yes.
measure, okay. So, Majority Leader?
Thank you, Mr. President. In that case, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1478 under Committee Report 116.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1439 under Committee Report 60.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
This is the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop. Parliamentary status of measure was still in the period of individual amendments by the sponsor, and by way of introducing his amendments by substitution to the committee report. So may we now recognize Senator Win Gatchalian and to introduce individual amendments, Senator Hontiveros.
If there is no objection, session is suspended.
Majo,
Risa, okay? You're done. Session is resumed. The sponsor, Senator Gatchalian, is recognized. Senator Antiveros also for interpellation.
for amendment, Mr.
Sorry, for
President.
amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the good sponsor, my seatmate, be willing to hear a brief explanatory message to my one proposed amendment, which I think I know the fate of already at the hands of the good sponsor. But would he be willing to hear it on the
I will,
floor?
happy to hear the proposal, Mr. President.
Thank you, good sponsor and Mr. President. So just a brief explanation to my proposed amendment. Mr. President, the Civil Code states that a contract does not exist unless there is consent of the contracting parties, an object which is the subject matter of the contract, and a cause of the obligation which is established. A person cannot be compelled to give his or her consent to a contract involving private property, especially with another private entity, absent a clear legal requirement and the observation of due process. The ancestral domain of an indigenous people is private property, Mr. President. However, despite being private property, our bill would have the effect of abridging the right of indigenous peoples to give or withhold consent to energy projects involving their ancestral domains by imposing deadlines on their decision-making processes, by limiting the grounds upon which consent can be withheld, and by making approval of projects the default in case of inaction. More troubling, the denial of an application due to the refusal of an indigenous community to provide free, prior, and informed consent appears to be appealable. Are we not denying indigenous peoples the right to freely make decisions involving their ancestral domains, Mr. President? Are we not making it harder for them to resist encroachments that threaten the very character and essence of their land, such as coal plants, Mr. President? Is this burden imposed upon any other group of private landowners in the Philippines? Mr. President, are we imposing this burden because of the belief that our indigenous peoples cannot be trusted to make decisions for themselves, Mr. President? I respectfully submit that the imposition of limits on the decision-making process of indigenous peoples is inconsistent with the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. I thus call on our body to reconsider the implications of Section 15 of our bill for our country's indigenous peoples, communities that have been marginalized and excluded for so long. Within the bounds of law, Mr. President, let us let them do with their land as they wish. And if we cannot leave them be, I strongly urge that the following amendments be adopted. So my proposed amendments, good sponsor, Mr. President, the 75-day period in the case of the free, prior, and informed consent certification in paragraph 1 of section 15, line 4, should be counted from the time of the submission of the FPIC report to the regional review team. Similarly, 75-day validity of provisional approvals should be counted from the time of the submission of the FPIC report, which is in paragraph
Section 15 din.
4, Mr. President, after numbers 1 to 6. Action of applications for certificates of non-overlap should be released by the NCIP within 20 days. Section 15 still, first paragraph, line 2. I apologize, Mr. President, and to the good sponsor that the amendments I will propose are not in sequence in our bill. And last but not the least, Mr. President, appeals process should be through the remedies provided in section 65, 66, and 67 of the IPRA, which is section 15, first paragraph, line 11, Mr. President. Those are the amendments that I will be proposing in turn to the good sponsor. So to put it now in the proper order, Mr. President, good sponsor, section 15, line 2, sorry, yes,
Please
Mr.
cite the
President.
page number and then the line number of the page.
Yes, Mr. President. I propose to amend section 15, line 11, to read that actions on applications with the NCIP shall be released within 20 calendar days in the case of a certificate of non-overlap, and so on, Mr. President. I
That
so
first,
move,
okay.
Mr. President.
So what does the sponsor say?
Mr. President, before I reply to the proposal, Mr. President, we are quite aware of the rights of our indigenous peoples community. That's why we provided mechanisms that will protect their rights and make sure that due process is enforced within a reasonable time frame. And in fact, we invited the representatives, specifically the Commission on Indigenous People, to participate in 2 of the hearings and also one technical working group which we conducted. However, none of the commissioners attended the hearings and also the technical working group. But yet we took into account the rights, especially ownership of land, and that's why we laid forth a process of consultation, a process of a due process time frame, and we are not actually removing any of the processes that they need to embark in order to make a decision. We're just putting a time frame. And from 30 days, we actually increased this to 150 days because from our observation of their processes, this can be concluded in the 150 days as prescribed by the measure. I admire the recommendation and rationale of the good lady from Akbayan. However, I cannot accept the proposal of our colleague from Akbayan.
The first amendment simply changes the number of days, right? This is the pending one.
From 10 to
Yes.
20 calendar days, yes, Mr.
And you're not
President.
accepting it already?
I think if I'm not mistaken, there's also
Subsequent?
subsequent
Okay, yes, okay.
changes
So you
also.
see it.
That's the
You have seen the larger picture
yes.
already. So, Majority Leader, how do we proceed? The proposed amendment has not been accepted by the sponsor.
If the amendment is not accepted, therefore it is lost. It is up now to the distinguished lady, Senator Tiveros, if she would want to appeal the amendment to the body.
Thank you, Mr. President, good Majority Leader. Yes, as I expressed to the good sponsor, just to make things of record, I would like to appeal the decision to the body, Mr. President.
So, Majority Leader, how do we proceed now? Given
Given the situation that we are
situation.
in right now, Mr. President, I don't think we can successfully hurdle the proposed amendment at this point. So if they are willing to wait, we will have to suspend consideration and take this up in the next session, Mr. President.
And given that there are going to be amendments which I can foresee the sponsor will not accept additional amendments, so can we schedule this early while there's still quorum in the session?
Yes, perhaps we will have to put it in the number 1 on the agenda after any sponsorship.
So that we can-
Number 1 in the period of interpellation or amendment.
Okay, so right now,
Question is the proposed amendment or not. So
Suspend.
with that, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1439, Mr. President.
I
is there-
subscribe to the wisdom of the Majority Floor Leader.
there's no objection. We suspend consideration of this measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader, and good sponsor.
Mr. President, I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, September 11, 2017.
Any objection? There being none, session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, September 11, 2017.